So the point of talking about the first 2 episodes was to decide for myself whether or not I was even going to continue with the show. And the answer I ultimately came to was yes, despite the fact that I believe Ahsoka no longer has an ultimate purpose within the Star Wars universe. I was interested enough to keep going with the show. But since I don't tend to review shows until they're ultimately finished, on the basis that it's kind of like reading a few chapters of a book and then reviewing it, it's not really fair to say whether or not something is ultimately good or bad until you've seen it as a whole. So if answering the question as to whether or not I was going to finish it was the point of the first one, what's the point of this one?
Giving people what they want.
So people have complained a lot about the pacing of this show. I've heard the word glacial used a few times. I don't actually mind the pacing as much as I think a lot of other people did. For example, Andor had very slow pacing in its first couple episodes, and I understandably agreed that it did kind of drag, but once you got into it, I thought, no, you needed that slow pace to begin with. You needed that build-up. Sometimes you do have to sacrifice a bit of quick excitement, something always holding your attention in order to get that reward. I don't believe you always have to be on 100 all the time. Is Ahsoka up to the quality of Andor? Again, I'm not going to judge until it's finished, but I ultimately doubt it. But even taking that into consideration, there is a lot about this show that is very, very slow. And to prove that, I would just rhyme off to you right now what I remember about episode 3. Ahsoka is training Sabine. There is some kind of very, very obvious referral to A New Hope. I think it's even a line ripped wholesale from it.
I can't see. How am I supposed to fight?
I can't even see. How am I supposed to fight?
And just stop it. Please just stop it. I understand you want to emulate the old Star Wars, but I think Jon Favreau said, I don't want to be inspired by Star Wars, I want to be inspired by the things that inspired George. That is how you make Star Wars. Granted, Jon Favreau doesn't always do it right, but the sentiment is correct. Stop using yourself as a source, if you know what I mean. Just stop it. And then the ship runs into trouble. It needs repaired. Actually, I think the bad guys damaged the ship, and they're in the middle of a chase because they're trying to get to the planet where the bad guys are on. And Sabine has to fix the ship. I think the droid gets powered down. Does that happen in the 3rd episode or the 4th one? I don't know. Anyway, Sabine has to fix the ship, and Ahsoka, to hold off the bad guys, goes on a spacewalk. And while this, in concept, is pretty cool, I think this is an example of Dave Filoni's animation directing not really translating very well to live action, because there are certain things that look good in animation that just don't look good in live action, and this was one of them. It just didn't work. And they crash land on the planet where the bad guys are, and that's all I remember about episode 3. Oh, Sabine fixes the ship, then they crash land on the planet where the bad guys are. Now, I do want to make a couple more comments about episode 3. In the technical elements of the show, still very good. The sound design especially is very good. I loved the training segment between Sabine and the droid. When she's training, the sounds that are going through, it is really effective. I mean, it's little stuff, but this is what's kind of good at building the world, kind of layering it, giving it dimensions and flavor. And I didn't mention this in the first video that I did on this, but I love the score for this show, like the opening and closing song. I don't know why. I mean, I think it sounds more mystical than science fiction, although of course Star Wars is science fantasy, not science fiction, so leaning a little bit more into the mystical aspect, I think it's pretty good. I also like that Sabine is struggling and has to overcome her lack of skills with the Force, but she's freaking Mandalorian, and they're making her look like she can't fight at all. One of the episodes in Rebels I saw was the episode where Kanan starts training Sabine with the Darksaber. And even though she struggled with that particular weapon, you could still see she could very well fight. They showed her to be a competent warrior, which is kind of fundamental if you're a Mandalorian. And this kind of ties into what I'm going to speak about with the relationship between Ahsoka and Sabine and Ahsoka's training methods, the Jedi ideology, everything I'm going to get into. But the whole lesson of that episode that Kanan took was that he was trying to train her like a Jedi when she's a Mandalorian. And I've said this before on videos, Mandalorian ideology and Jedi ideology are diametrically opposed. That is why the idea of Mandalorian Jedis just doesn't work. Now, I do find it believable that a Mandalorian could have learned the ways of the Jedi, or that a Jedi could have left the Order and become a Mandalorian, but you cannot be both at the same time. It's like saying, I'm a Buddhist, but I'm also a Viking. You cannot follow one ideology without betraying the tenets of another. Now, on to Ahsoka, and I did get into an interesting conversation in the comments section of my last video. Sorry, I can't remember your name. Here it is. And one of the points this commenter made was that Ahsoka shouldn't be dead. Like, her new purpose in the Star Wars galaxy is the exploration of new facets of the Force. Like, it's a way to explore the Force a little bit further. My argument was that that is an extra world ideology. That is her meta ideology. That is not within the Star Wars galaxy. That's what the writer might want her to do. But what is her internal world ideology? What does she want? What does she need? What are her desires? What are her drives as a character? And what exactly does she serve in the story she's currently in? As I said before, her previous purpose was to be Anakin's Padawan and to further his fall to the dark side. And again, I explained why they kind of messed that up a little bit. It could have been a lot better, but that was her purpose, and her purpose was fulfilled, and they failed to give her a new purpose. And it was kind of like what happened in The Mandalorian. Din Djarin's internal narrative purpose was to protect the child, and then ultimately to get the child to a Jedi. And after that, he'd lost his narrative purpose, so if you're going to continue with him, you need to give him a new narrative purpose. And I thought that new narrative purpose was going to be him, after having removed his helmet, coming to terms with his faith, like being an apostate and being told, now that you've taken off your helmet, you can no longer consider yourself a Mandalorian. And it would be kind of like some kind of spiritual journey, and his new purpose would be an internal one rather than an external one. But then, of course, they didn't do that. Because anybody can be the Mandalorian, we don't specify which Mandalorian we can be, we can do it. Oh, for fuck's sake. So yeah, that was my argument, but let's just say that the exploration of the Force is enough of a reason for Ahsoka to still be around. How are they exploring the Force with her? What new ideas are they bringing to the table? Because the only two differences I see between her and the previous Jedi Order is that she doesn't follow standard Jedi protocol.
We drop out of hyperspace so far from the planet.
Standard Jedi mission protocol when approaching an unknown situation, in order to avoid enemy surveillance.
He's still doing this?
And that is not being a Jedi, that is just mission protocol. That is not the internal philosophical, spiritual ideas of Jedi ideology and the Force in general. And two, it's that she is far more willing to take on less Force-sensitive individuals and train them in the Force and give them the education that they need, whereas the Jedi would not do that.
the Jedi Order would not have accepted her. She is not an acceptable candidate.
By their standards.
So, fair play to Ahsoka, that is a pretty good move forward in terms of the ideas about how Force sensitives should be treated, but that is not Jedi ideology. That is, again, the rules for how they continue their system. The difference between these two things is, for example, Catholic ideology is ideas of forgiveness and charity, penance, humbleness, all that stuff. But the rules are don't eat meat on a Friday. So instead we have fish. So you have fish on a Friday because your body needs to be clean before your body and soul need to be clean before you drink the blood of Christ and eat the body of Christ. So before Sunday, you have to go to confession on the Saturday. And again, for your soul to be clean, your body also has to be clean, so you can't eat meat. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Do not quote me on that. I am not practicing, but I was educated in a Catholic school, so that's kind of the difference, if you know what I mean. The difference between the rules and the internal spiritualistic ideology. Ahsoka is changing the rules, but how is she exploring how are they exploring the Force with her? What exactly are they doing? So, again, we can wait and see. We're only halfway through. There are still 4 more episodes to go. But so far, I'm not really seeing how they're introducing anything new to the whole spiritualistic ideas of Star Wars. The Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2 did far, far more for that than anything we've seen since Disney bought this thing. And also, like I said, the whole lesson of that Rebels episode for Kanan was that he can't train Sabine like he would train a Jedi, because she's not. She's a Mandalorian. She's the opposite. If you take a look at Mandalorian armor and weapons, they are basically designed to spite the Jedi. You have the Force? Well, Beskar is a Force-resistant material. You can use the Force to leap great distances? Well, I'm going to create a machine that'll make me fly. You can use the Force to take weapons from my hand? Well, why don't we bolt our weapons to our bodies? You can use your lightsabers to block bastards. You can use your lightsaber to block blaster bolts? Well, block this motherfucker! Yeah, basically, look at any part of the Mandalorian armor and weapons. It's basically an exercise in spiting their historical foe. That is what Mandalorians do. They see an enemy stronger than them, and they take on that enemy, and they grow as a result. They use combat as a way to move their culture forward. If you look at Legend, and again, I know I'm talking about Legends, but this is so interesting. The Mandalorians worship a war god. No surprises there, but there's also a god of peace, and the god of peace also is the god of sloth. So essentially, the god of peace is Mandalorian Satan, okay? He's the villain in the Mandalorian mythology, okay? Because they believe that constant warfare and conflict is the creator of progress, and that, ideologically speaking, there is a truth to that. So you can see why this culture just keeps warring and warring and warring, because if they're not doing that, they're not progressing, they're being lazy, they're sinning. But if you look at Jedi ideology, they are the guardians of peace and justice throughout the Old Republic. This is the reason why Mandalorians cannot be Jedi and vice versa. They can learn both, but they have to be one or the other. They can't be both at the same time. So yeah, Ahsoka is basically just training her like she would any other Jedi. It's not about incorporating her Mandalorian heritage and her Mandalorian skills, such as they are, into battle. It's just all about listen to the Force and listen to... Yes, some really, really new and innovative stuff being done with exploring the Force here so far. And, oh yeah, there's also a bit where Hera goes to a bunch of senators to say that the bad guys are trying to facilitate Thrawn's return, and they're all like, throne's not returned. The Empire is dead, and all the Imperials under our command have sworn oaths of loyalty to the New Republic. Well, as long as they pinky promise, that's fine. And again, with Sabine's training. People were annoyed at the prequels about the midichlorians because they were disappointed that the Force wasn't something wholly spiritual that could be taught through hard work and a spiritual connection with the universe around you. Now, it is something you are innately born with. You can't just make yourself more Force sensitive. You can train yourself to have greater skill using the Force, but you can't make yourself more Force sensitive. But that is a thing that most people now accept is Star Wars lore. This whole Sabine training thing muddies the waters of that. Is Force sensitivity a teachable thing, or isn't it? Again, we haven't really gotten any ideas about how Force sensitive Sabine is. Yeah, again, they might clear this up. They might. But one thing I am quite worried about is, are there things in Rebels that they are expecting their audience to already know? Or are they just setting things up, letting them stew, and then planning to tie it all together and it will be better by the end? I don't know. But something has gotten me quite worried that this is basically just Rebels Season 5. Now we move on to Episode 4, and this one was praised a lot more highly by the fan base. There are still a lot of naysayers, but let's look on the bright side of life. And this is another point that I went on a full-blown rant about. Ahsoka is just taking Jedi morality, and so is she a Jedi or isn't she?
I am no Jedi.
I mean, I would have thought that, I know she did leave the Order, but I would have thought that a Jedi was, again, just following the spiritual practice of the Force. But there are loads of ways to worship the Force within the Star Wars galaxy. So, and she said before that she doesn't consider herself a Jedi, so now does she? Dave, again, make up your mind. If you're not going to let this girl have some peace, then at least just decide what she wants and decide what she believes. And again, with Sabine, there's nothing Mando about this girl besides her being stubborn. How does her upbringing and cultural outlook affect anything, let alone her Jedi training, her Force sensitivity training? I guess you could point to her stubbornness and her anger blocking her ability to connect with the Force, but the Sith use anger and all kinds of emotions all the time, so it's not that that's blocking her connecting with the Force. And even then, that's not really something you can exclusively connect to her Mandalorian heritage. It's something you just plainly comes with trauma. And again, it would have made the teaching so much better if Ahsoka had addressed that, had not just said anger and fear, they can give you power, but they also make you lose control. She had a very open master, and she knows exactly how being detached and all of this really leads to a lot of the really bad stuff in the Jedi Order, and yet she's acting just like them. She's acting so fucking detached. Why? Why is she not talking to her pupil, her friend, about anything human, basically? Sorry, sentient. Exactly again, how does Ahsoka still being alive give us the ability to explore interesting new things about the Force? Because so far, she's acting like every other freaking Jedi I've ever seen, except for the fact that she'll take on slightly less Force sensitives. And again, good on her for being less elitist and giving people who are less talented the education they deserve, but there's nothing different about Ahsoka in regards to any other Jedi out there. There just isn't. So I'm going on too many rants here, so let's get back to what happens in the episode. They engage the Padawan bad guy and the henchman bad guy, and Ahsoka kills the henchman bad guy, and this really confused. I did not know what was going on. And this is coming from someone who has watched Clone Wars, knows what the Night Sisters are, and knows about their magic and stuff, and was so freaking confused about what that was. I mean, I heard in one of the episodes that they said Morgan Elsbeth was a witch, but I didn't know. I just thought this was some kind of alien that just didn't bleed, but rather dispersed gas upon being injured and dying. That's exactly what I thought. And I thought, okay, that's actually a pretty cool concept. You know, when you have, like, flesh and blood humans and everything, if you pierce the skin, you bleed and you die. But that would be quite interesting, a being that doesn't bleed, that instead exudes this kind of stuff. Like, I just thought that was an interesting concept. But no, I heard people online saying, no, that just means that he was a reanimated corpse that Morgan Elsbeth used her witch magic to do. All the setup they gave for that was saying that Elspeth was a witch. How? Even me, who has seen the Clone Wars, knows who the witches are, has actually read the background of Darth Maul, so again, I know what the Dathomir, I know more than the average person what the Dathomirian witches are. Even I was confused. How is any kind of newcomer, any kind of even casual watcher going to know exactly what this was? I'm so confused. But yeah, Ahsoka beats the henchman bad guy, and she leaves Sabine to deal with Padawan bad guy, and Sabine's helmet gets knocked off, which is so freaking dumb. Since when is Mandalorian armor this easy to take off? How can you just bonk it and it knocks off? Again, greatest warriors in the galaxy, everyone. Now, I did think that they did do this to do what I was saying before about using her Mandalorian heritage to say, this is how she fights. This is what makes her stronger. This is what makes her different from other people trained in the ways of the Jedi and Force sensitivity. Because they pan to the helmet on the floor and then cut back to the fighting, and Padawan bad guy has Sabine on the ground, and she says, you are powerless, and instead of using the Force or doing anything like that, she basically uses her Mandalorian weapons to get one over on her, and that's great. But am I just seeing that? Really, people, tell me, did you pick up on that? Because I was kind of convincing myself, did I just imagine that? Because there is nothing else. There's absolutely nothing else in these episodes so far to suggest that Sabine's Mandalorian heritage is even present, let alone a strength for her. So I could just be seeing things, and this could have just been a convenient way that the writers saw to get Sabine out of that difficult situation. And I've not talked about this guy, Balen, because he's a really interesting character. Like, you can see that from his lightsaber, it's orange, it's not fully red, and from the subtle performances here, like, rest in peace, by the way, like, you're a great actor, you were gone too soon. And from just what little they give him, because this guy doesn't speak very much, but from what little they give him, he does manage to just portray kind of somber inevitability, like he truly believes this is what needs to happen. And again, the idea that people ideologically support the Empire, not just because they're greedy or they're corrupt or anything like that, because of course, greed and corruption, yep, those are the big ones, those are the ones, but yeah, there has to be people who ideologically support this thing, right? So the idea that he does, and the idea that maybe, because we still got 4 episodes, but I really, really hope that they're not just going to ignore that, like we're going to find out why. And again, this is the first emotion that we see from Ahsoka is in this scene. Of course, there's the usual post-Disney / Dave Filoni ignoring of canon, in that somehow everybody in the Empire seems to have known that Anakin Skywalker was Darth Vader, when in fact that was a very, very, very closely guarded secret.
Everyone in the Order knew Anakin Skywalker. Few would live to see what he became.
Again, there's other people who can touch upon continuity and everything like that. That takes a hell of a lot more research than I am currently willing to put in. Do I have red wine lips? I feel like I might have red wine lips. So Balen yeets Ahsoka off the side of the cliff when Sabine turns up, and she is ready to completely destroy the map, locking Thrawn and also Ezra away in another galaxy for potentially forever. And this is a really good exchange. This is good. I was thinking, yeah, now we're cooking with gas.
Your family died on Mandalore because your master didn't trust you.
I was thinking, yes, they haven't abandoned the breakdown of the relationship that happened before the show started between Sabine and Ahsoka, because that was literally the only thing I was still watching for. I thought their relationship had a lot of potential and I wanted to see what happened between them. So yes, again, please don't abandon it, okay? Because at this point I'm thinking maybe this wasn't something that was explored in Rebels, because I started to think, was the breakdown of that relationship something that was in Rebels and I just didn't see it? But no. It looks like it's still a plot point in the show, so good for that. And also, again, Balen, very interesting character. Keeping his promises, very important to him. He still has quite a lot of honour to him. Again, he's not fully dark. And Sabine just decides to give him the orb. I'm not really sure how I feel about that decision yet, but again, we'll wait and see. And of course, there's the ending where Ahsoka is that the world between worlds she's in? I'm not entirely sure. Did the hyperspace ring somehow manage to take her with it? Again, but that's not the show's thing. That's something that they're almost definitely going to explain in the next episode. And she sees Anakin, and at least they did bother to de-age him this time, but good grief. Like, TikTok filters and Instagram filters do, 10 times better a job at this. Why does this look so bad? I mean, it's not... I understand, if there was movement, that does make the animation of it a lot harder, because it is essentially animation. You're kind of digitally drawing over someone's face. But he's just standing there. The only movement is a very, very tiny, minute smile. Why does this look so bad when TikTokers have the ability to de-age themselves to the point where they can essentially catfish people? Good grief. I don't know what's going on. I know there's a lot of stuff about how they don't pay their animators well, working conditions, etc, but good grief. Oh mother, does that look bad. The middle of a show is often the hardest to talk about because you're well into the show at this point. You can say whether something has had a good beginning and whether it has grabbed you or not, but when you're talking about the middle, you really can't say that much about it because you don't really know where the story is going yet. And like I said, even though it was slow, I didn't really take that much issue the way other people did. I think it was only really the first episode that, because the first episode was a lot longer, that I really thought, good grief, they are just filling empty space. It is all just air at this point. Episode 3, I guess you could say, was a little fillery, but it did give us, not very well, but a little bit about the Jedi and Sabine's training and everything like that. Like I said, even again, Ahsoka doesn't really seem to be any different than any other Jedi I've seen. She doesn't seem to have developed the ideology. She doesn't seem to have evolved her own facet of the ideology. So yeah, she doesn't really seem to have any outside of the narrative purpose, as well as no internal narrative purpose. So again, I ask, why are you not dead yet? Why are you even here?